Professor Theodorou Fortsάκης is a member of the Greek Parliament since January 2015 with the New Democracy Party. Previously, he was a rector of the National Kapodistrian University of Athens. He has also been Dean of the School of Law, Deputy Dean and Director of the Department of Public Law, has been a full professor of, and is a full professor of Public Law and Tax Law at the Law School of the University of Athens, visiting professor for over a decade at Sorbonne, Paris I and Paris II, and at the University of Paul Cézanne and Marseille. Professor Fortsάκης has also been a member of the Special Supreme Court of Greece and has served in several commissions and boards of directors. Mr. Fortsάκης, you have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your kind invitation, and allow me to welcome on my behalf also all our friends who arrived in Greece from abroad. And I wish you not only a good conference, but also to enjoy Athens and the good spring weather. As you all know, in Greece this last year we go through a very specific experience since we have a new government till January 15, and we have known a lot of experience on different fields, and especially on the field of education. We had the obligation to respond to a lot of new positions of the new government concerning education in general, and especially independent or private education. We qualify, our constitution qualifies independent education as private education in Greece. And allow me to focus in these few minutes of my speech here today to the specific problems of independent schools which were created till this arrival of our new government. And let me start by saying that one of the first declarations of the former Minister of Education, who was also a professor of a university, was that excellency in school and in university represents a disease. So this disease, which is excellency, do not allow us to accept the idea of meritocracy, and do not allow us to accept the idea of any kind of evaluation in any level of our education. This was the position of the government, and this was the attitude which was adopted till since January 15, and that this has been a continuous practice till today. Our constitution, the Greek constitution, provides in Article 16 that the education represents a public good which is protected by the Constitution and which is guaranteed by the Constitution, and the Constitution guarantees the free access to education of all levels, and also the Greek Constitution guarantees the right of the parents to choose the kind of school which they desire for their children, and namely either the public school, either the independent school. And so, on my opinion, we should conceive the education and the protection which is offered by our Constitution as a whole, without any subdivision into private or independent or public education. So the state undertakes the commitment to support all kinds of education, including, of course, independent schools. Concerning independent schools, allow me to give you very briefly some statistics which demonstrate the importance of independent schools in Greece. Concerning the preliminary level, more than 8% of the preliminary level schools belong to the independent education, and they host more than 7% of the student population. Concerning the primary schools, almost 7.5% of our schools belong to the independent schools, and they host almost the same percentage of students. Concerning the first level of the secondary school, what we call in Greece gymnasio, French call it college, 5.5 of these schools belong to the independent schools, and they host the same percentage of students. And concerning the high schools, more than 7% of the high schools are independent high schools, and they host almost 6% of the student population. This shows how important is in Greece the participation of the private sector to the educational system, and it explains, of course, the idea that the state should support very actively the independent schools, especially during this very difficult time of crisis, economical crisis, which of course affects also the independent schools. Unfortunately, the position of the government remains extremely, let's say, negative to any idea of private schools and meritocracy. The idea came some months ago to create a TVA, a VTA of 23%, which would apply to all services which are offered by the independent schools. Thanks God, this was not the case finally, because of the reaction mainly of the European services, which did not accept such a new taxation, which would of course create very, very difficult problems to the independent schools. And so the idea was finally rejected. The population of the student population of the independent schools comes mainly from average Greek families. The idea was supported from the government that only rich people have the possibility to access to independent schools, but we know from the statistics that these do not correspond to the reality. Unfortunately, the government has taken, since these 15 last months, a lot of legislative and administrative dispositions which limit in a very drastic way what we call the autonomy of independent schools. And the government tries to create a very strict framework of control of all kinds of programs and activities of the independent schools. Recently, the decision was taken by the Minister of Education, the new Minister of Education, according to which no evaluation is allowed to independent schools, and all evaluation which applies to independent school should conform to the evaluation created by the Minister of Education, which, as we all know in Greece, is in reality a non-existing evaluation. Today, in the newspapers, you can see on the front page the announcement of this same minister, who in reality will impose to independent schools to go through a control, through a state control, concerning all exams of the students of independent schools. As you understand, this is in reality a measure which will finally create huge difficulties to independent schools. We support very strongly the idea of the autonomy of independent schools on all levels, and this autonomy includes, of course, the employment and the evaluation of professors and teachers who work in the non-state schools, always under, of course, the control of criteria which refer to meritocracy. we support in a very strong way all form of evaluation, external and internal, under the condition, of course, that objective criteria are employed. Concerning the compulsory standard that the application of such curriculum without any possibility of adaptation adaptation to the independent schools will affect in reality the independence of the schools, and we strongly ask the state to let the independent schools apply the curriculum as they think in the best way and according to the best practices. We feel that it would be a good idea to support also economically the independent schools, and that could be explained, of course, by the fact that parents who choose the independent schools for their children support a tax burden which is a tax burden that do not correspond to any public service, and a good idea would be to create a kind of voucher which would allow the parents to choose more easily the independent schools and enjoy a part of the burden they support, tax burden they support, without objective reason. We also feel, as my colleague from the United Kingdom explained very clearly, that even if one chooses to study in the framework of public education, it would be, let's say, extremely positive to create synergies between public education and independent education, and the fact that in the independent schools we can always see innovative and new programs applied will inspire also the public education. I think that during these next weeks in Greece, I'm afraid that we will have to answer a very difficult law, which will be project of law, which will be presented by the government, and which will try to make obstacle to all kind of development of independent schools, and these measures will finally, if ever applied, if ever adopted and applied, I'm afraid that they will lead to the abolition of the idea of independent schools. And this is why we should all here in Greece, with the support of your conference in union, strongly support the idea of independent schools in Greece and fight and defend them. Thank you very much.